All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for the Silicon Valley Property Report. As always, I'd love to get started on time. I want to respect your times. I know you're probably coming to the end of a busy day. And that's part of our report today is how busy we all are getting because the market is roaring back. So we certainly want to cover that and other topics this evening with you. I want to make sure and give a shout out to my boss, our CEO, Brian Crane, who's joining us tonight. Um, I think he's going to add some of his own insight into some of the things that we'll cover tonight. I'm not sure how long he can stay with us, but as long as he can, I'm happy to have him. Brian, anything you want to share before we kick off with the first slides and into the presentation?
No, I just appreciate you taking the time here, Robert, to share. And I think the more we know about what's going on out there and the more we can tell our clients about it, the better agents we are and the more likely we are to land business, both buyers and sellers. When we can tell them the truth, we can point to the truth. And it's wonderful to have the third party, the third party reference, which is fact. And you're not just making stuff up, you're actually showing them. There's a philosophy that I love, and it's, show them, don't tell them. So if we just tell people all the time, then they're some of them will believe you, some of them won't. But if you show them via statistics, you can make great headway. So thank you, Robert, for putting this on. I think it's a great value add for the company. And I appreciate you doing it. I'll just kind of hang out, and if I have anything to add, I'll chime in.
Okay, perfect. And everyone else that's listening, Carol's here with me as always. If you have questions, type them in, and she'll read them. And if they fit in with what we're talking about, we'll try to answer them as we go. If not, we'll come back to them, and I'll respond to you later. And Brian, you make a great point about the facts. It's a great third party verifier. And I know we have a lot of professionals listening tonight. I know we also have some consumers listening tonight. And I want to be mindful of that. And it's easy to do a mixed message like this to a mixed group because we are just covering the facts, right? I'll give you some of my interpretation. I'll give you some of my analysis. But especially today, because we have the full May numbers in, we're a couple of weeks cycle past the stay in place order and that kind of lockdown that we were in. So far year to date, a little over 5 months into the year, we have a very clear pre-SIP market that was really, really engaged and moving quickly, and values were moving up and buyers were out in force and multiple offers and everything looked good. And then it just stopped overnight. We'll show that in a second. And then we had about a 3 or 4 week period where it was just like a malaise. And now we're back, and now it's taken off again. And as I talked to a group earlier today, and I said, it's really imperative, whether you're a professional or a consumer, that you understand how quickly these little mini cycles are moving from deciding to act and actually acting. The market is changing. So that's always true, but it's been especially true this year. So let's jump right into it with that intro. And we'll start with this article I got from Zillow.com, actually. And it's titled, "Experts Say Spring's Missing Home Sales Will Be Added to Coming Years." This is nationwide. As always, I like to start these and kind of take that 30,000-foot view, that big view from the national down to the state and regional, and finish with our own Silicon Valley market. It's always helpful, but especially now because we have so many things happening that are not normal. And so when we can kind of look at them real time to other markets, it really helps us identify what is really going on here. And so I think this is important. We did miss a lot of homes on the market. We missed a lot of buyers that were out, and now they're returning, where these experts are saying that they expect them to come back anywhere from this summer all the way into next selling season next year, April, May, June, early June of next year, and into years forward. That's going to be really important. How fast they move back in, what effect they have on inventory and buyer demand, which obviously can affect prices, is going to be really touchy and really important to both professionals and consumers as they're making decisions on buying and selling real estate. So it's that return to the market is kind of shaping up like that U-shaped recovery that we've been talking about of the overall economy. And we're going to see in a few minutes, in a few slides, what that means locally. Another great visual that they put together here, according to Zillow Home Price Expectations, they're talking about how the experts believe, they say 41% said they think economic recovery will follow a U-shape. 33% say it will be a bumpy multi-year return back to the trend growth. Both patterns are characterized first by a sharp decline, which we've already experienced, and then match how experts see transaction volume recovering, with the consensus generally being a more gradual journey back. And this is important. 10% experts surveyed, they believe transactions will shift to later this year. We are already seeing that in our local market. 22% expect a double up during next spring shopping season. If that happens, that's not great news for the rest of this year, potentially troubling news for next year. If inventory is doubled up next spring, that means that demand has to be, or the prices will be impacted negatively for homeowners. 55% said shopping season will be spread out over several years. So we're early days. First out of the gate is at 10% expectation, or experts that believe it will return later this year. If later means the last week of May and first week of June, they've been right so far. But we still got a long way to go and see what plays out. But it's going to be really important that, again, both professionals and consumers look at these week-to-week movements to see how fast it comes back, what is the length and breadth of the recovery, because that will affect how you shop, what prices should be expected to do going up, going down, and then always tracking the demand at the same time to make sure that your investment is safe and profitable. And if you're selling it, then that you're protecting the equity on the way out. They also say that, and this is becoming more and more of a talking point that I'm hearing and seeing, this idea that what the consumer has learned in this time was that they want to live somewhere where it's not so packed, it's not so crowded. This idea that panelists predict future home buyers will show more interest in suburban and rural areas at the expense of urban density. Brian, you have a question?
Oh, I'm just going to make a comment on the previous slide. And whenever I was out with clients, and this happens in listing appointments all the time, where they ask you, well, what's your opinion on what's going to happen next? And I would always say, one of my dad's favorite sayings was, he would say, economists often wrong but never in doubt. And the idea is that they always have an opinion. They're usually not right, but they have a strong opinion. And the point that I tell clients would be that nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future. And the best way to do it is to tell them that what we do know is that today we have certainty. We know for sure this is what's going on right now. Tomorrow we have no idea, and now more than ever that is true. Tomorrow I have no idea, but right now we have phenomenal. For instance, right now we have phenomenal low interest rates. We also know that in the long term, and this is a fact of life, not a economist prediction. In the long term, real estate is a good thing to own, and there's so many statistics that you can throw on that, but that's sometimes the clients want to suck you into some sort of a commitment, what's going to happen in the future. And in fact, we don't know. And that's another great reason to be on this particular webinar, because you want to know what's going on right now, and you can share
right
that
now.
Right? And
yeah, you're kind. The quote I love on statistics and economists is Mark Twain's, "There's lies, damn lies, and statistics." But the power in that, though, is we work with people who have long-range plans, and we work with people that are doing it right now, and we can service both. And that's what the idea of doing this weekly, so you always have the latest and greatest information. And again, that's a good lead in also to what this point is, where people are making projections that people are going to want to live away from urban density. They want to go into the more suburban and rural areas. And I always, going back years doing this, I always tell people 1 week, 1 month is not a trend. So I want to point out, this is not confirming the prognosticators that are saying people are going to want to live elsewhere. However, in 1 month, I can see Santa Clara bounce back strongly. You see pendants here for the month up 89%. And Gilroy was up 242%. So don't quote me that this is confirming that, Luke, but I saw this as soon as I was doing the numbers Sunday morning. And I sent out something on Facebook that said, if you're thinking of buying in Gilroy, go today. This was Sunday morning. I said, go today, because you don't want to be shopping there after all these pendants are closed and become comparables. And so that's another point. If you're thinking right now, I'm looking in a rural area, I'm looking in Gilroy specifically, these numbers, these facts, this data is really good motivation to go and look today. If you didn't go Sunday, if you ignored my advice on Sunday, be sure you go out this weekend, because these will close, they will become comparables, and I'm sure they're going to close higher than before, because when you see the amount of listings, that low inventory, and then the absolute just ferocious appetite buyers are showing for that particular market right now, that's naturally going to drive prices up. And so you're better off, if you're thinking in the short term to buy in that area, when you see numbers like this, buy sooner rather than later. Every day, every week, every month, those values are going to rise. So that's a great example of what you were saying, Brian, is we know this now. This is not a guess. This is not prognostication. Will it continue? Will it maintain throughout the summer, throughout the year? We'll find out. But if you're in the short-term planning, you already knew this is where you want to live, this is where you want to shop, call your real estate professional and go look at it right now. All right, that's enough of an advertisement for Gilroy. Shout out to all of you in South County. Here's some more information for you to start thinking about what's going on right now, and really good leading indicators for at least the immediate future. And these are these home purchase sentiment indexes, where they go and ask people, what do you think about this? And I want to show you something that's really interesting here. The home purchase sentiment index, Fannie Mae's index increased in May by 4.5 points to 67.5. The index is down 24 points compared to the same time last year. That just means people's confidence in home prices rising is down. However, when you look at it, the details, like good or bad time to buy, the percentage of Americans who say it's a good time to buy a home increased from 48 to 52%, while the percentage who say it's a bad time to buy decreased. So on the buy side, despite everything we've been through, despite all the news out there, buyers are like, yeah, I'm even more confident. I think it's a great time to go and buy right now. Sellers are the opposite. Sellers, Americans who say it's a good time to sell a home decreased from 29 to 32%, while percentage who say it's a bad time decreased from 65 to 62. Excuse me. So think about that. We already have an issue with inventory. It's really, really low. We're seeing buyers come jumping back into the market, and the buyers their sentiment is like, this is the perfect time to buy. I'm going in. I'm going to go all in right now. At the same time, sellers are saying, I don't think it's a good time. What is that going to do? Exacerbate the lack of inventory, which will create another demand and push on prices upward. So when we're talking to buyers and saying this is a good time to buy, we know it's expensive out there, but we know it's going to get more expensive. It's simply understanding the numbers, reading the future indicators like this. And in the short term, for sure, this is what we're facing. This is what we're looking at. Why I say it's a good time for sellers is I think sellers are thinking, nobody's working. Unemployment is through the roof. You can't go out and see a house. How could I possibly put my product onto the market now and expect enough people to come look at it, bid on it, and give me the price I want? That's our job as professionals. Go out and talk to people. That's their sentiment. We know the facts. We know the numbers, especially when you see the numbers I'll share with you later today for San Mateo, San Benito, and Santa Clara County. The sellers need to know, we understand your sentiment. We understand what you feel, what you believe. Here are the numbers. Here are the facts. If you're thinking of selling, the market's great for you. Go out and listen today. All right, kind of showing this, another great little service that I like to look at, house services in Southern California. They do a really good job, I think, of creating, doing analysis and showing some numbers. And this is what they put together for U.S. single family homes for the next 5 years or so. And what I want to focus on here is, you see here, I think I put it, yep, this is where we are right now. Big picture, no great shape. And yet we're excited as professionals, like we're back in the game. The market is moving, our buyers and sellers are active. Big picture, we've got a long way to go back, okay? Now they forecast back to the natural trend, delayed or second selling season, but then back to the end of year dip, drop. And then here's what we were referencing earlier, that doubling up next year. So they are of the mind of that group that says we're gonna have a tremendous selling season next year. People that would have sold during this cycle are gonna wait and sell next year in about 8 or 9 months. Now, when I see this, if I'm thinking about home prices and values and my equity, I'm thinking, wow, a massive jump in available properties, that's not good for my equity. However, this is what they see for purchase applications that buyer demand in the same period. So if I toggle back and forth, you see they are looking at demand will follow and keep pace with the increase in inventory. So, and that's going to be the key. That was the key here. When we had the massive drop, it fell in demand too, maintaining the ratios and keeping valuations and equity safe. As it's growing, it's sort of keeping pace too. Demand is slightly outpacing inventory, which is putting upward pressures on prices. But watch this going forward. If you're thinking about, I'm not looking to buy this week or this month, or I'm thinking about next year, watch this. If the buyers don't come back at this level to match this level of sellers, your equity might be in jeopardy. Buyers are thinking, I hope it doesn't happen so prices can drop. You won't have to guess. If you just keep in contact, you just follow what we're helping and sharing with you every week, you'll know exactly what's going on when it's your time to act. All right, so now right here, luckily the demand side should keep pace with the supply side, avoiding downside pressures on prices. Again, great news for homeowners, not the best news for home purchasers. However, looking forward, if they maintain this cycle all the way through, keeping that kind of equilibrium, your investment will be safe. We don't see any drop in prices in this arena, in this prognostication going forward. So that's why I keep saying still a great time to buy. The further left you buy, the more time you have gaining equity instead of paying for someone else's. All right, so moving right along. We got a great news in the employment numbers last week, and now here's a sign of the times. Great news was we're only about the third worst ever report. That is good news. It's all about a recency bias, right? This market jobs report compared to any other time period would have been horrendous, would have been scary. Compared to this dip, this drop, fantastic news. You all heard it from the president on down. Everyone was cheering the fact that that 2.5 million Americans were back to work and our unemployment rate was down below 15%. Take the good news where you can get it. The markets reacted fantastically to that news. I'm talking stock market. I'm talking employment numbers. So good news all around, and we can use all the good news we can get. And here is the important thing going forward: how fast and how smooth this curve goes back up. This is still a lingering issue. This is still something to watch going forward. If it flattens and it doesn't come back, eventually that means consumers are cutting back on spending. That'll mean that consumer confidence will drop. That'll mean that confidence in every good, including real estate, could be affected negatively. So good news now, let's take it, let's watch it and make sure this keeps going up.
Robert, one thing you just mentioned the stock market, and our Silicon Valley, as I know you've reported here before on this show, Silicon Valley tracks pretty closely the local stock market,
Yep.
the market, NASDAQ, Standard & Poor's, and that's back basically to close to record highs again. So I think we're going to be in pretty good shape if you believe that it follows that market. The stock market has a tremendous amount of confidence that things are going to be okay, right?
We haven't shared that graph in a couple of weeks. I'll include it next week again. For those of you that don't remember it, the median price in Silicon Valley tracks very closely with the S&P 500, and with the S&P being back at or near record highs. Someone asked me last week, or I think 2 weeks ago, are we past record prices in home loans? Like, yes, we are. And that there's another indicator that you can watch consistently and has been very, very closely tied. I don't know which one leads the other, but you're always in the ballpark when you follow them. So that's a great point, Brian. Another issue that has been lingering, people ask me throughout the week with email and text, what about forbearances? What about foreclosures? What about people that are in trouble? I told you several weeks ago, that's not going to be an issue, certainly nowhere near what it was in the past. But to be precise and to be as honest about the situation as possible, Black Knight, which does a ton of great reporting on defaults and mortgage payments and lack thereof, reported just last week the number of homeowners in COVID-19 related forbearance plans falls for the first time since crisis began, meaning now only 8.9% of all mortgages now in forbearance. What I will key in here is this last point. According to the McDash Flash Payment Tracker, as of May 26th, a significantly lower share of homeowners in forbearance had remitted May payments than did in April. This ties back to this number. The massive move in unemployment has not yet affected our real estate market. We're going to talk about why in a second, reminder. But if that kind of malaise continues and it extends for a long time, eventually you cannot avoid 13% of Americans being unemployed, affecting every good, every sector, every service. So not yet, not now, not for the foreseeable near-term future, but something that we need to watch if we're being really smart about our business and the advice we give to our buyers and sellers. So won't spend too much time on that. Just, it's not here. Don't hope, don't pray, don't be afraid of foreclosures coming back. This, when all is said and done, is an elevated number. Generally, we track around 1.5, 2% of defaults of properties going into foreclosure. If this were to keep going, we might see a 3 or 4%. Statistically, over a big market, that's not very much. Obviously, that's the world, so the people that affects directly. But that number would not affect overall values, overall prices, and overall markets. So just kind of going to quick couple of minutes, keep that out of your mind. It's not anything to worry about. Believe me, this is where I cut my teeth in data and marketing. If it comes back, I'll be one of the first to know, and I will share it with you. And this is what I was referring to. Again, the last couple of weeks, I haven't really been talking about the economy, but I think it's important because as we get into a more normalized market, these things do affect us. And I shared this with you last time, this website, layoffs.fyi, coronavirus tracker. It tracks the number of layoffs since COVID-19 started for startup companies. And you can see we had a big jump from March through May, and now it has leveled off. It has tapered off. If it has not affected us here, it should not affect us here. There's a couple of caveats there, though. We had, from everything I've read, massive underemployment in our high-tech sectors before COVID-19. This may not have affected us because those that were laid off might be like, hey, look, I'm going to sit out this one during SIP. I'll be fine. Every big tech company is hiring. I'll go back to work in May or June or July or August. So that's me guessing right now. What I do know is that to date, this has not affected our values in Silicon Valley, but we should pay attention to it. At least have kind of a mindful eye on the edge of what we're seeing. You see here the breakdown in those layoffs: transportation, travel, retail, food, mirroring what we've seen nationwide. Those are not massive sectors in our economy vis-a-vis the real estate market, but still trends to watch, things to follow. And then finally, the one place or one of the few places where the worst news is in the Bay Area is, not surprisingly, in startups, in layoffs here. So if this continues to taper off, and especially if it starts to drop, those will maintain our current numbers. If it continues at this level, remember that's still elevated from where we were. That would over time potentially start to affect us. Again, I don't think it's there. I don't think there's any worry in the near term. I'm talking this summer, but we track it every week just in case, and you'll be the first to know if this starts to change and we see this potentially having an effect on our Silicon Valley markets. All right, so let's jump in again. You should be very familiar with this now, AEI's Housing Market Nowcast. It's been a great indicator, a good reflection on what we just went through, and has been so far a very good leading indicator on what's next. Those who've been listening every week, you've known the market was hot before it got hot because you've been paying attention to these indicators, leading indicators, and that's what are buyers doing. It's easy for us to see what sellers are doing. It's on the market or it's not. But what is a buyer doing? What are the conversations they're having? Which lender are they talking to? Are they getting pre-approved? Are they locking the rate because they found the house they like and they're in contract? And this is what we see. Continuation of the last 3 weeks, strong upward trend. Purchase rate lock volume for the week of May 30th was up 21% from a year ago. Further evidence that we're past the worst of it. We're not only past the worst of it, we're back above where we were last year. Really amazing considering everything we've been to. If you've been paying to any news source that's been high topic on the news is buyers are out there in force. That's a great message for all potential sellers out there, which we'll cover in a second. Important changes in the market. Credit tightening ended some weeks back as lending standards remain little changed in recent weeks. That's great news. It was hot and heavy news around March 15th that the mortgage markets were tightening, that lending standards were tightening, that there was a lot of people were not able to get the loans, the type of loans they wanted or needed based on their income sources, based on their credit scores, and many other factors. We got really, really tight. Over the last 3 weeks, we've stopped tightening and we're starting to slowly loosen. Those markets are opening up. That should allow even more buyers to come into the market. And we need to go and get more sellers understanding it's a great time to sell, or that's just going to really drive the prices higher and higher and higher really quickly. So I'm not rooting for one or the other. Both have needs, both have wants. I just want to make sure that everybody has the best and the latest information. So overall, really good news there. Really strong. We can see here the year over year. This is what I was talking about. This is 2020. Not only are we back to the highs prior to SIP, we're way beyond last year's number. This is where we were. And I'll remind you, when we were in 2019 compared to 2018, that recency bias I talk about, it didn't feel like a strong market. But when we rolled back and looked at all the numbers, it was a positive market for equity. It was a positive market overall. And now we're seeing that demand, not yet what it was in 2018, but surpassing what it was at its highest point last year. So again, great news for all of us that are in this market. News that our consumers, that people are relying on us for good information, need to understand, need to know, so that when we're out there trying to make these big decisions, they have the latest and the best information. Something I want to cover quickly. Again, this is really tailored to the professionals out there. If you are relying on your customers, your consumers, getting their information from other news sources, this is my opinion that I'm going to share with you now. You're going to get a skewed view. News tends to tend towards the bad. You don't get good news on the nightly news, you get bad news. It's not a judgment call, that's just my observation. And that goes into our industry too. What do I mean by that? We had the market just disappear for a while there in March, early April, and we see that it's back now. We are trailing in California, a lot of the market, a lot of the country that have bounced back even stronger, especially the central part and the south of the country. But this is great. 16% change year over year is a good, solid number based on what we've been. Here's what I need you to worry about and think about and make sure you get out there and educate your consumers on. This recency bias again. This is where we were pre-SIP, having a great year, way over last year's number. The velocity, the direction of the market was up, up, up. We were all excited about it. And then SIP hit and it disappeared overnight, literally almost 22% drop year over year. That was mid-March through about week 17, which was, I think, mid-April. And now here we are again, not quite back to where we were year over year, but getting there. This is California, mind you. Earlier, I gave you the national numbers. This is a strong, strong rebound. If you're still thinking it was this market, you're wrong. If you're still thinking it was this market, you're wrong. We are in this market, a quickly recovering market, very strong rebound and growing week over week over week. What I caution you is what I wrote over here, what I didn't write, what I copied here from AEI. The recovery evidence in weeks 21 to 23 varies greatly by state and region. It is the strongest and most consistent in the South and Southwest and lags generally in the Northeast, Midwest, and West. That is us. I don't want consumers to hear that news and say it's not a good market. They're not going to break down at a national or regional level exactly what's going on in Silicon Valley or even in California. So this is why we're sharing it with you. California is strong. Silicon Valley is even stronger. If you remember, if you've been here with me for weeks, when this first came out, the worst metros, the San Francisco Bay Area was up here. I think it was third or fourth worst in the country. 4 weeks later, complete turnaround. Our market, they bundle us in with San Francisco in this index. The fourth or fifth strongest rebound in the country. Really amazing, really, really good stuff. And so this is where I want you to be as a professional. This is where I want you to be as a consumer when you're hearing what's going on in the market. They're not going to break down locally. They're going to go to the big national picture or the regional, and that's not going to sound good for the West. It's not going to sound good for California. But you're not buying California. You're not selling California. You're in Silicon Valley. You're in a neighborhood in Silicon Valley, and this is the information you need. This has been another great indicator for me. I know it's a convoluted, crazy graph, but all it's doing is measuring increase in metro foot traffic index and the year-over-year change in purchase rate locks. Foot traffic is a lead indicator to rate lock activity, which is a lead indicator to closing, which is a lead indicator to pricing. So this is one of the hard ones, but this is where you got to trust me or believe me. We're moving up the chain. We're positive on both fronts. Foot traffic up, rate locks up. Our market is moving up, 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 all right? And we're starting at the top of the food chain in terms of prices, mind you. That's an important thing to consider. We are moving up in price because demand is out there. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, I share with you each week showing time index. And again, another indicator where not only have we recovered, we're beyond last year's number. We're showing 18, almost 19% increase in foot traffic for showings in California versus last year, right? Again, this is not where we're at. We're here. I don't know exactly where we've been, but I do know this. I've always shared this. If you give a 5-year-old a marker and I say, follow this line and say, just keep following it, they'll follow it and they'll follow it and they'll follow it and say, what's going to happen next? What do you think that 5-year-old will do? Their little 5-year-old brain that follows directions and follows shapes is going to keep going higher and higher and higher. That sounds weird, but until there's a massive change in our market, which happened here, the momentum follows the direction that it's been going in. And this is what you should expect here. That second selling season, we should continue to increase through June, probably to the first part of July, before we start seeing the regular seasonal dip. So pay attention to that, please. All right, now let's start getting back into our more local numbers. Another fantastic chart that IQVIA is sharing with us every single day. And again, it's been really good indicator, leading indicator. It's been now great to show what we just went through in real numbers and real direction. And this is what I've been sharing with you. The listings had that massive drop, but has recovered nicely back into higher year-over-year numbers here. or very close to it, and increasing in June when they usually peak in May. That's another important thing to consider. We're not used to this activity in June. We're winding down. We're still strong. It's still one of our best months, but June is not our best month in real estate in Silicon Valley. May is. So this is a great thing for you to understand and share and plan for. This is not a regular June. This is a better June in terms of activity than most Junes ever. So what does that mean for July? July is usually very slow into an even slower August. What will be key for all of us is, does this second selling season last 3 weeks or does it last 2 months? How much of this pent up demand and supply will be pushed into the summer and fall? How much of it will wait until next selling season? That's going to have an incredible impact on our productivity, our production, on equity positions. So watch it week by week by week. And you're lucky because I'll do the hard work of putting it together for you and sharing with you each week. But let's go into what that means. We saw the listings are a leading indicator. They go up. As they fell, initially sales maintained. It even grew in the first week of SIP. Eventually, because it's a lagging indicator, meaning it happens after another event, it started to drop. When new listings continued to go up, sales were still dropping until they gain their footing, until they get 2 or 3 weeks, a couple of weeks into showings resuming, even though they were limited, and now we're on an upswing. And we want to watch this closely. We cannot have these detached too far from each other. So far, so good, as we'll see in a bit. This has been nice. We're still lower overall numbers, but the ratios are good. They're clean and they're positive going forward.
Hey, Robert, real quick, one of the things I've been saying is, and I'm just kind of guessing, I'm not looking at stats, but I've said from the beginning that I think this whole thing's going to act just like a flu does, and which is going to be really bad for a little while. Just like when you get the flu, it's bad for a while, and then you kind of get better, and then you start feeling really good. And I kind of see that happening here in this market. Just and the only concern I have, and maybe you can address it, is this pent up seller demand that didn't happen over the last 3 months is kind of now hitting the market. And I think now more than ever is a great time for a buyer, because I think inventory might be peaking here with all that pent up inventory that didn't sell, that didn't even come on the market, is going to be coming on. So it's going to be a great opportunity, I think, in the near term for buyers to get out there. And prices the evidence is prices are staying at previous levels or even higher. So sellers,
exactly.
are winning too. So the question is at the in as you say, at the end of August, if it'll be interesting to see, if this thing does track the stock market, then we should just kind of, in the perfect world, we should be back to normal, kind of a normal world when all this pent up seller demand goes away.
We're going to see that, Brian, and you're going to see that in certain markets we're already at normal, believe it or not. And I'll share that with you in a second when we get into the heat maps and the county data. But the reason we've always used the heat maps is because you can see real time, almost real time, week to week, understanding the ratios, demand to supply, and how those interact. You can make judgments, reasonable judgments, without waiting for the fall season or whatever. And I'll show that in a second. And I'm glad you brought that up to highlight that. When I get to that point, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. Again, if you've been watching, just positive, getting back to normal, what Brian just said, right? Here we are back to new homes listed, back to 2019 numbers. Change to contingent, back to 19 numbers. You see a steady rise week over week, and getting back to where we were last year at this time. When you made the analogy of the flu, human nature, right? If you get laid out with a cold or a bad flu for a week, take 9-10 days, as soon as you feel better, what do you want to do? Go back out and do all the things you couldn't do. So I think there's an element of human nature in that, in what you're saying. And early days, we're seeing the numbers bear that out in terms of getting back into the real estate market. Pendings, again, good, healthy, Late season, not normal for June, but we're going to take it. Here's what I'm talking about, Brian, in those week-to-week numbers and why for years I've broken them down week by week. I've known working in Silicon Valley real estate, whatever's happening nationally, whatever's happening regionally, there's always something different happening here. And when you work in Silicon Valley, you know that means San Francisco down to Hollister. And on the same week, one of those markets is hot, the other is cold, relatively speaking. And this is why we've always done this. And it's been a really great boon in this time. As we see here for Santa Clara County, for example, inventory continues to show slow but steady growth, and pendings rising week over week after the normal drop in March. And so that's all good news. The relative balance between the two year over year has continued and is acting as upward pressure on prices. And that's really important for the consumer to understand. If you're reading the headlines, if you're just watching the news, it's almost impossible to comprehend that values in real estate are rising during this time. But here are the numbers, here are the facts. I'm not smart to tell you why it's happening, but I'm bright enough to look at the numbers and read them and tell you this is what's going on and this is what it means. In the year over year change. And
can I add one thing real quick on that? The high-tech companies are still hiring, and they haven't laid off their recruiting, their employment recruiting staff. So, you know, their high-tech isn't going anywhere basically. So that's I think that you can ask. What I always used to ask my clients, they'd ask me, what do you think is going to happen? I ask them, is your company hiring or are they laying off? And it just hits home right there with the seller, and they go, well, we seem to be hiring, or, you know, yeah, we have a hiring freeze, but we're not laying people off. And it just instantly puts it in their head that, okay, what he's telling me is right. This thing is got some energy under it.
Yeah, and that points to the fact that all these leading indicators always end up on the charts and end up in the results that we see looking backward. And so the real power is you got to understand what has happened looking backwards, but start to read those indicators so you can answer the really hard question, what's next? What's going to happen now that I'm looking to buy? What's going to happen now that I'm looking to sell? And so, for example, here we see where we track every week the last 4 years to compare. Year over year, we're still down year over year in each category, but we're starting to see the growth in pendings outpace the listings. So we're still 31% down year over year in active single family, 26% down in condos and townhomes, but the pendings are only down 10%. That means we're having a recovery because we used to be 40, 50, 60% down here, but we were 40, 50% down here. So you see the buyers coming back into the market faster than the sellers. And so when we're out there telling buyers, you've got to be aggressive in your offer. You've got to really think hard about the offer you're going to write. And it seems, again, inconceivable with all the news we're getting. But these are the facts on the ground. The demand on the buyer side is coming back at a faster pace, at least in recent weeks, compared to the listings. And that's just going to drive the prices higher. Condos and townhomes not performing as well, but at least it's stable. There's no worry that your condo or townhome is going to drop in value because it's not going to grow as fast as the SFR class is, but this is still good news, all things considered. And then you see this year from the start of the year, which I love to measure. You can see again, actives up 163%, pendings way up 107%. That is very much like what we experienced last year. So if you ignore everything in the middle and just see these big numbers to start and where we are today, again, 2019 was a very robust year. If we account for the massive drop, we're probably somewhere in between 2019 and 18. For the professionals out there, you know how fast 2018 moved relative to 2019. This should give you an indication. Right now, we're kind of in between those two seasons. So I hope that's clear. If you need clarification, send me a text and email. I'd love to explain it. This is vitally important to answering the question, where are we going next? All right, in the Santa Clara County area, here we go. I've shared with you in the past, we got an interruption here, but we're back to where we would like to be. And here's where I want to focus, where I want your attention to focus tonight on this county data so we can get through all the counties. And it's right here. Current versus previous month. Again, now we have some real-time experience. In March, And in the first weeks of April, we're like, what's going on? I don't know. There's nothing to compare it to. Well, guess what? Now, believe it or not, we have an idea of what real estate like is in during SIP, during COVID-19, during massive unemployment, during tons of bad news. And here's what happened. May was good. April was good. May was better. Listings came back, jumped up 16% in the county. Pendings tripled that. Quick math there. No, quadrupled that. 89.9% growth. Sold is a lagging indicator. All these pendings will be closed in June, and that will be a great number, right? Do not wait if you're a consumer to see closed transactions in June and late May affecting your decisions in late June and July. It'll be too late, unless that's just your timeline. And then if that's your timeline, that's okay. But if you're considering it now, trust me, these numbers, as they continue to close, will become the comparable for the last deal, and prices will go up. And that's what we're seeing everywhere. And that's why I want you to focus on those two numbers. I compared what usually happens from a May to a June. Again, our for sale doesn't increase that much, but our sold and pendants drop quickly. It's the end of the selling season, and we usually have this kind of reflection. So I just thought it would be interesting to show that what we usually see from May to June and what we're seeing from an April to May, and I expect May to June to be more houses for sale, sold up, pendants way up. I think, yeah. And we're starting that way for the first at least 5 days in June. What'll be cool is next week we'll see, are we trending that way? You see, for at least for the almost first week of June, comparing to May, for sale is up, sold way up, pendants still way up and higher. So I have full confidence that these will maintain. When you come in next week and listen, and we'll have 2 weeks of June data, that's all going to be there. And you're going to see we were right. And the momentum was straight up. And if you're a buyer or a seller and you read that and you understood that, you listened to your real estate professional, you're going to be very happy with your decisions you make in the coming weeks and hopefully months. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because some of this is not as relevant. This is, again, new listings, a great new indicator so far. When new listings lag below the sold and pended, demand is up. And that usually leads to good numbers, and then sellers seeing what their neighbors sell for, and then they jump into the market. We saw that late this year, was going gangbusters, and then it fell off. Here we go again. People jumping back into the market as sellers and being greatly rewarded with really fast, really efficient closings, getting top dollar for their properties. And so the neighbors will see that. These will become the comparables that I'm talking about and say, now they're right. It's a good time to sell, and they'll jump into the market. As long as we maintain that pace with pendants, and again, we're showing both from April to May and early days in June, it is still strong. It is still maintaining. This is where we can make some really good judgment calls, really good educated guesses on what we're going to be facing in the next several weeks in these markets. My favorite slides, the absorption rates for pendant sales. Again, big bounce back. We covered this a week ago, and I told you, looking at the lead indicators, we would see a super strong May, and we were right. Here you see it maintaining again. Big jump from April to May. And so far, again, it's early days, but we'll watch it every week exactly for that reason. It is still growing and still outpacing what May was. Again, absorption is simply measuring the appetite of the buyers to absorb every property on the market, regardless of the size of the market. Really important now because we are so low in inventory. We're not measuring days on market the way we had, although we're back. We're not full months of data. So this is a really strong leading indicator of data. And this is really important. We're maintaining and actually growing in June for the county. The closed data is lagging, but even that was strong, 42% for May. And now we have seen already early days in June, growing up to 55.8%. This is the trajectory. This is what you want to look at. Where, fine, Robert, thank you for showing me what happened in May. I want to buy in June. But thank you, Robert, Tim, what happened in May. I want to sell in June. What can I expect? This is why you pay attention to these. These are the leading indicators. Anything can happen tomorrow to change these. But absent a big change in our markets, in our country, in the world, in finances, this is what you can expect for the next few weeks, for the next month or so. So watch it closely, pay attention, make sure you're communicating that to your consumers. If any buyers or sellers out there listening, when we're talking as professionals about how great the market is, we're not crazy. We understand all the challenges out there in our society. We understand all the negative news out there in terms of home ownership, in terms of valuations, in terms of equity. This is one clear, bright spot in our national, regional, and especially Silicon Valley news. Something I want you to consider. We again talked about this several weeks ago. We told you it would happen because it happens every year, not because we're smarter than most, not because we have insight that others don't. We simply trust the numbers. We simply trust the momentum. We simply trust when we reach a peak in the sold to list price to the sold to original list price, it is followed by a dip. This is not falling prices. This is where the phenomenon I said, neighbor sees, neighbors sell the house, get a fantastic offer, way over asking price, they're super happy. Neighbor B says, then I'm selling, and mine is worth more than his, so they surpass the market. They're still gonna sell more for their neighbor than their neighbor did because the values are still going up. They just won't go as high over their original asking price. This is all this means. Why is it important? Especially right now. I think we're sensitive to bad news right now. So if you're a seller and you go to market and you're overpriced by $10, $15, $20,000 and you're not selling in the first 2 or 3 weeks like your neighbors did, then that might have a really outsized negative stigma in the market. So be very, very clear and understanding, price correctly. This is where the great unknown is for me. People are on edge. And I don't want to overplay that statement because it always happens in real estate. It happens to us every year. I'm worried that it might be too reactionary this year. Look at the numbers, look at the valuation, look at the trajectory, price it correctly. You're going to get a fantastic offer. You're going to hit a record price. You're going to be really happy with how you protected your equity and made this move. But be wary of falling to the trap of pricing at the same rate as previous sellers did. That typically does not work into this part of the selling season. Okay, enough of that. Here's those heat maps. Again, if you've been watching every week, these red numbers are still red. Yes, I know that. Why am I smiling? Because they're smaller red numbers. That means more properties are coming to the market. That means the message is out there that for sellers that they can list, they can do it safely, they can do it as a benefit, net benefit to them financially. And so I know they're red, but they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The more work we do as professionals in executing one of our primary fiduciary duties, and it's educating the public, is letting them know if you're thinking of selling, despite all the news you're hearing, it is a good time. How do we know that? Because these pendings are even smaller. They're still red mostly, but look at this. Willow Glen, Cambrian area, already surpassing last year's number. Absolutely amazing. Evergreen is flat, so I counted that as a win. I put it in the black. Santa Teresa is getting close. So many single digits, certainly not the 60s, the 50s, the 70s that we were seeing just a few weeks ago. The buyers are coming back. Talk to your clients, talk to your buyers and sellers, and just toggle back and forth on this. This is what's going positive direction. More properties on the market. That's okay because there's even more buyers entering the market. If you're working with buyers, show them the same thing. If you like the area, if you like the zone, you like the house, you have to be aggressive because the competition for the limited inventory is coming on very fast, faster than the new inventory is. All right, absorption rates I put in here. May's number inside the circle compared to last year's number. Red means the absorption rate is smaller. That means the buyers are not coming back as fast in that particular zone as they did relative to last year. Again, because we're entering a more normalized market, I'm comfortable sharing this and saying, compare it to last year's May numbers. Look at this year's